Hello and welcome to the Classic Car Weekly podcast, the popular weekly podcast that is also the sibling podcast to the popular weekly title. I'm this week's host, staff writer Jesse Billington, and I'm joined for making it a two-man team, Mr. David Sinister, the editor. How are you?
I'm not too bad, not too bad.
Excellent. Busy week this week, isn't it, as well as we've got a bumper issue in production.
Yeah, I was going to say that's going to be quite an exciting guide to all the various things that are happening over the bank holiday week. I don't want to give away too much at this stage, but should be a good issue and that hits the shops this on Wednesday next week.
Next week, yes. But in the meantime, we've got plenty to talk about in the current issue that's out and about, and we'll actually kick off as we usually do with an Hour Classics catch up. Have you had a chance to do anything? I know you've been hoping to set aside some time to deal with a slow flat on the Mazda.
It's now a completely flat. It looks very sad, unfortunately. So that's going to be my next thing to do. I know that with my other classic, I had to employ your talents actually with the Toyota Avensis, which is going to be making an appearance in our classic soon. But yeah, I very stupidly went out without any tools. Then found that my indicator died, and it's quite a fiddly job to mess around. You need a long bladed screwdriver to get to it, and you were very helpful because you actually had said implement tool with you, and you were able to get it on and off in under 10 minutes, I think.
Yeah, my emergency toolkit that lives in the back of the chimney. It's just a small sort of little fake leather folio that has like some tools in it. Usually for bicycles, I used to take it with me when I do cycling, and it just lives in the back of the chimney now. And yeah, net result, it was kind of handy to have there. And I had a screwdriver that I was able to help you pry out the indicator casing and do a quick bulb swap in the car park at CCWHQ. So yeah, sort of normal stuff for me on a Wednesday in the office.
Yeah, mucking about with old cars, that's what we like.
That's what the job is, yeah. But speaking of mucking about with old cars, I finally had the MG started. I finally got it to turn over and
Ah,
run on Saturday, just gone. It didn't run very well, and it took a huge twist of timing to actually get it anywhere close to sort of running. But it would hold an idle, and it held 60 psi of oil pressure as well. No, 60 pound oil pressure. So not doing
good.
too bad there. So we've got a healthy engine, but I want to definitely go back through and make sure the timing is properly correct on the timing chain of the camshaft, because it shouldn't have sort of over a quarter of a turn of timing to sort of put it into sort of ignition. So clearly something is out along the line, but it's a step in the right direction. We're able to sort of diagnose things and start remedying them. Plus, I've taken off the intake and exhaust manifolds to get to a water leak on the coolant return line. So I do need to order those parts so I can get around to fitting that and fixing that next week. But yeah, we're slowly getting there. And
Brilliant.
speaking of my Our Classics garage, the Jimny features in this week's issue as well, which is in the Our Classics section. I can't remember. I think this is the rear brakes that I overhauled at the start of the year, which turned out to be a far more fiddly and intricate job. But you can read all about that in this week's issue in the Our Classics section. And the Jimny is actually a great way to lead into our lead news story in this week's issue, because I love the Jimny. It's a great fun car to drive around, great fun off road, very practical, especially in the fact that it's ULEZ exempt. It's a quite a clean running modern classic, and that's sort of the crux of the lead news story, isn't it? That we've got sort of essentially an emissions drop from classic cars as classics seem to get newer.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting one, this. So, an agency who do research and help sort of various publications called Loop has carried out a study looking at the emissions from classic cars, and what they found is that because more and more 90s cars, including some of the cars that we knock about and quite regularly, because they have things like catalytic converters and better engine management and all of these things, it means that their emissions are better, which means that the classic car sector as a whole is increasingly being populated by cars that are better for the environment than they were sort of 5 or 10 years ago, which is a great thing. However, it's a little bit more nuanced than I think some of their initial findings suggest, which they do acknowledge a little bit, is that because 90s cars also survive in greater numbers than the Hillman Imps and Allegros and things of a generation ago. There's more of them about, which means that obviously more cars also equals more emissions overall. So it's a bit of a mixed picture, really. But we've got lots of expert analysis on what that actually means for the industry, and a look at also some of the ways that you can cut your pollution on your classic, no matter what the age is.
Yeah, it's one of those interesting things. It really depends on how you cut the data and sort of analyze the numbers that you're supplied with to figure out sort of where this story does or doesn't lead. And yeah, it's interesting because also the way they've bracketed the age of the cars, isn't it? They've gone for more than 30 years old, which expands it more than what we'd typically sort of classify as historic, certainly on by the DVLA's metric at least. So that includes that sort of younger generation of cars going into the early 90s. And yeah, it's an interesting story, and I think obviously it's good news in the fact that we are seeing sort of these cars being considered classics or sort of certainly heritage vehicles by sort of broader realms of society as well. But also, I
Mm.
think it's a as a headline piece, it's a really good way to sort of remind people that classic cars can be green, and we do often talk about the ways that you can make classic motoring green and the use of sustainable fuels. The very nature of the fact that these cars are recycled, we're still using them long beyond their sort of original term of use, and therefore sort of prohibiting sort of the incredible amount of waste that they could possibly sort of produce. So it's yeah, it's a feel good story overall, but there are a few sort of caveats to it in the way that you sort of look
Mm.
at it and frame it, and things to bear in mind.
And I think there are some important distinctions as well. Certainly, when we're talking about historic vehicles, the cut-off that the government uses, as I'm sure a lot of listeners will know, is that once your car reaches 40 years old, it's eligible for exemptions from tax and MOT, and in a lot of towns and cities across the UK, it's also crucially here exempt from a lot of the city centre emission zones that are being brought in. But the actual historic vehicle definition that's used by the FEHVC, by FEVA, the big international body, and a lot of experts in the industry is actually 30 years. And when the National Historic Vehicle Survey comes back, which is due next month, that actually they're talking about vehicles that are over 30 years old, not 40. And it's interesting. It'd be interesting to see in that survey whether they talk more about emissions, because certainly the most recent research that I've seen suggests that historic vehicles, that's anything over 30 years old, is responsible for less than a quarter of 1% of the UK's annual vehicle emissions. So actually, as a hobby already, our contribution to the annual vehicle pollution is minuscule anyway, and a lot of that now you can carbon balance it. You can use sustainable fuel as well if you've got the wallet to cover that. There's all sorts of different things you can do. So actually, and don't forget as well that by using an older vehicle, if you're using one day to day, you're saving all the pollution and the impacts of having a brand new one being made in the first place. So if you're using an old car quite regularly, you are recycling. It's green.
Yeah, manufacturing industry is sort of still worth bearing in mind a huge polluter. And you
Mm.
said that obviously British transport, it actually makes up a very small amount of our, as a nation's sort of carbon dioxide, greenhouse gas pollutants. One of the hugest parts is manufacturing industry. So if you're sort of consider exactly how small of a percentage classic cars are within the nationwide pollution as a whole, we are an incredibly small part of that. And yeah, it means you can have a relatively clean conscience and clean exhaust pipe when you set out to enjoy your 1990s hatchback in its classic form, let's say, which is all good news indeed. We'll move on to another piece of good news actually that emerged from last week. This is a coverage of an event that actually happened on the day before Festival of the Unexceptional. This, I believe, and this was Petrol and Pride at the British Motor Museum.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting one, this, because this was an event aimed at the LGBTQ community, and it was a really nice way of bringing together that community, because we know that obviously the gay classic car group is thriving. We know that there are a lot of people in the industry who are who are members of that community as well. And actually, it was a really nice way of bringing together sort of not only classics but also new cars as well. And certainly, one of the things I've seen over the past decade or so is there's been quite a really concerted effort within the classic car community to bring in people who otherwise might have maybe felt excluded by previous events. So we've seen, for example, Festival and the Exceptional, we've already talked about. We talked about people whose cars previously they might have had their noses turned up by it's sort of the more traditional events. We've seen Rustival over the past year as well, which has been aimed quite openly at those who feel that they might not be able to, sort of take part in other events. So we've seen a lot going on, so certainly in the last sort of 2, 3 years as well, to try and broaden the appeal of classic cars. And I think that's actually a really good thing for our hobby.
Again, sort of the more the merrier in that sort of sense of the more people taking part in supporting our hobby is a great thing. And equally, people from all walks of life have all these incredible experiences and importantly incredible knowledge as well when it comes to helping preserve these cars, and there's no reason that they should be sort of shut out or shunned from the hobby, because they will know just as much, if not sometimes more, on sort of certain specialist areas. And yeah, to get seeing this event sort of thrive and have such an incredible turnout. I had a few friends that were at the event, and it seemed to absolutely be sort of buzzing with a brilliant atmosphere there. And like you said, an incredible array of cars, from some sort of really interesting classic cars, some slightly more obscure items like a BMW Z1, absolutely fantastic car. And so on the list, we also had a '64 Pontiac Catalina. Absolutely love those beautiful big old saloons. Right the way through to sort of more modern cars. And I think this was organised by, I want to say it's Bentley's chief communications officer, wasn't it? Wayne Bruce.
Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, he kind of gave me the sort of the inside of again how this came together, and again he was saying that he knows a lot of people in the industry who again are members of the LGBTQ community, and this idea came together. And again, he reached out to people he knows in other with other car manufacturers and with the Gay Classic Car Group, and as a result, this has come together. And I think this is obviously it's a year one event. I thought it was really well received from considering it was a brand new event, and I'm looking forward to sort of seeing that event sort of continue and flourish in years to come.
Yeah, it'd be great to see it sort of come back for next year, and hopefully there'll be an even stronger sort of classic sort of just or element to it as well, because there's obviously, you've already mentioned, there's the Gay Classic Car Club, which do a huge amount for sort of welcoming that sort of band of society into the classic car world. And it's yeah, great to see that it's sort of branching out. We're seeing more and more events that really sort of give kudos to sort of celebrating the people and the cars that are there to sort of love and enjoy. So some really good news in this week's issue. Plenty of other bits and pieces to pick up as well, including the renewal of Bangers and Cashback for 72 more episodes, always a firm favourite in the CCW office. But we'll jump now into the lead feature. And this week we're celebrating the Ford Transit as it turns 60 years old. We've titled it as the van that made history in the lead feature. And it's a brilliantly written piece, actually, hugely detailed. And I'll admit to being a bit of a Ford Transit Ford Transit van fan, even.
Bit of a mouthful.
You try saying that after a heavy sandwich. But yes, it's a really interesting piece and a great bit of history to it as well. I didn't even know that they were used as sort of the show vehicles at Woburn Abbey Safari Park back in the 60s. That's just on my doorstep, and I didn't even know that. So yeah, well worth giving a read too. And I sort of prefaced this last week by saying, bring along your transit stories. So David, do you have any sort of transit stories from across the years?
Oh, I mean, I've driven many transits over the years, they always involved moving various things from one student flat to another. And I remember many years ago renting. I can't remember the name of the van company, but I picked it up and we went to my student flat in Carlisle, and we filled this van with all of my various crap that I've accumulated over the years, put it in the van, and I remember saying to my mate who was in the passenger seat at the time, he was doing again helping with the heavy lifting. I said, well, okay, let's give the M6 a miss, because I know a great road that goes down from Carlisle along the M6, which is the A6. And we cut off, we went down the road through sort of Low and High Heskett, and sort of skirted around Penrith, and there's this wonderful road that takes you up over Shap. We were only doing it for the views, but I was amazed by how well this transit drove, and I was there actually having fun with this thing into corners. I mean, I'm sure some of my stuff in the back got broken at the time, but that didn't matter, because you had this this big heavy load lugger, which almost felt like a sort of a slightly hot hatches quality to it, which I was absolutely reveling in how well the Ford Transit handled. And I think that's actually a really big part of why the Transit. This is something that a trick that it's made it stick going right back to the 60s is that it doesn't feel like you're driving a bus. It feels like you're driving a car, and actually quite a well developed one at that. So we've all seen those pictures of old sort of footage from the 60s and 70s of transits quite literally running rings around other cars. And that to me, I mean, that particular drive on the A6, skirting the edge of the Lake District, really brought that home for me.
Yeah, I mean, it was there was everyone always sort of regards the Mark II Jaguar, the Mark I Jaguar as a sort of like the prime getaway vehicles through the 60s. But everyone forgets that the Ford Transit was just as popular because you could get a hell of a lot more stolen loot in it and all of your fellow criminals. And it was easy to drive and drive at high speed as well because it was sort of stable, planted. You can get it to really bowl along quite nicely. Plus, it was ubiquitous. It was just a van. It disappeared into the crowd. But yeah, they are surprisingly nice driving vehicles, and the interior, certainly on the new ones, if you've ever driven a new Transit and say a Ford Focus or Ford Fiesta from the same generation back to back, you'll get in it and go, oh, this is just a slightly bigger Ford Fiesta. And it feels like it when you're driving it as well. It's got that little bit of Ford magic that makes it just feel quite nice. I mean, I grew up in the passenger seat of countless Ford Transits. My dad's company has always had them as sort of workman tools, and I can remember as a child, it was always my greatest joy was to be sat in the middle of the bench seat in a long wheelbase flatbed one with a tail lift on the back, and it had the giant pendulous gear lever in the middle of the floor, and it was always sort of my treat that I'd be allowed to do the gear shift. And I think that was probably sort of one of the stirring reasons why grew up infatuated with cars. But yeah, just sort of dad would sort of press down the clutch, and then I'd sort of get to move the stick into the next slot, and then it'd sort of come off the clutch, and we'd be sort of trolling along again. And we're like, they're sort of vehicles that everyone has a story with, and I've driven countless versions of them while sort of working for my dad, doing business bits, running stuff up and down the country, and they do just genuinely drive quite nicely. They're comfortable, well-refined places to be, and they're sort of the epitome of what made Ford so good over all those years was just really good, sensible design, well put together. And yeah, I think it's weird to sort of gush about something that is at the end of the day, everyone will go, oh, it's just a van. But then I think so many people have so many stories with them.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, you talk about clever design, and there's two that stand out for me. I mean, one of which was, I think, it was actually the same generation of Transit that, again, I used to do a lot of these student moves with. I remember one of the things was that the battery in the ignition key was always being charged when it was in the ignition barrel. I thought it was just that was genius. And the other thing which they had, which they have, I think, I can't remember if it's still on the current model, but I know they introduced it, not too long ago, was the idea that you could have a steering wheel that would fold flat when you're inside it, so you could put basically your lunch on it and use it at the table. And I was like, why has nobody thought of that before?
It is a great design. I know, yeah, it sort of folds flat, and you can either put like either your lunch on it, or more often not like a clipboard, just for sort of like jotting down your
Yeah,
delivery details.
well, this is the kind of thing, and it's really clever stuff that just shows that how much Ford have always listened to the people who actually lug stuff about.
I think the first vehicle I ever drove with a heated front windscreen was also a Ford Transit. So there's something there. And the amount of school trips I've been on where it was a Ford Transit minibus, sort of packed to the gunnels with boys heading off on usually a Duke of Edinburgh trip. And it was just sort of a fixture, a common fixture in sort of life growing up for me. And it's, yeah, I quite like them. And then getting to meet the super vans down at Goodwood Festival of Speed as well, because they had the full range of them all together, including the original Supervan one, not a recreation, but the original one, rebuilt admittedly after it's sort of been chopped and shut about for a few years, but sort of getting to go back to that origins and sit in it. It is a surprisingly refined and comfortable place to be. And I often sort of question, I'm relatively tall, sort of when I go to get into classic cars, like sort of how well will I fit? Triumph Spitfire barely fit in that. And I was like, the Transit, I sort of anticipated it being a bit weird, a bit sort of oddly laid out, but you get in and just go, this feels like a modern Transit. Just sort of, I've got the wheel exactly where I need it to be, the pedals exactly where I need it to be. I've got a great view out the front, and I'm like, oh, this is just an van, which was sort of the magic of the Transit. It's an van, but just exactly what I need it to be.
That's exactly it. I mean, it is, as we said in the piece, it's a van for all seasons.
Yeah, it is a van for all season and a van for all task. I'm trying to think. There's, yeah, so much to dive into in this story, and of course we've even got a nicely tied in keepers, which is a pre-production prototype model that Transit van fan Peter Lee sort of dedicatingly sort of restored and has sort of brought back to life. So there's a second fantastic Transit story to be enjoyed there. And let's see what else we've got elsewhere in the issue as we start to sort of wrap this one up. We'll keep it nice and short, so we've still got the entire bumper issue to produce. There is a top-notch Next Generation Diaries with Hannah Cozier getting her dream car, a 1987 Mini Mayfair, which I know will appeal to you as you're a big Mini fan, David.
I am too,
Then
yes.
Yes. And then the big story in Buying Opener lifts the lid on a classic Horde heading to Charterhouse while the way we were heads off to Ringwood. There's a lovely brewery near there that I need to go and do a tour of, and buying tips for the BMW Z3, which during the process of writing that one, I learned that they did a special 007 model, which was only sold in the US and only sold through a department store catalogue. Their Christmas catalogue came out, and one of the things you could get in it was a full scale actual BMW Z3, the 007 trim special edition one. I was like, that's quite cool. I think car companies need to start doing that more often. I'd be more interested in buying a modern car if I had to like go and get the John Lewis Christmas catalogue and leaf through and find the special edition.
Oh, there you go. There's your Christmas gift sorted then.
Yes, yeah, a 007 imported 007 edition BMW Z3 if you can find one. Otherwise, that's all we've really got time for on this week. It's a bit of a compressed and contracted Classic Car Weekly podcast, but as we've mentioned, we do have a bumper issue. David, do you have anything else to add in before we wrap up completely?
I was going to say, I think it's going to be a really good guide to the upcoming August bank holiday. So make sure you don't miss that. That'll be in all the newsagents and shops next Wednesday.
Very much worth picking up. There's just so much going into it. I've lost track of what we've actually got going in. It's packed. So get ready to pick up and enjoy both this week and next week's issue of Classic Car Weekly.